I would also like to say to all of the people who have shared their stories of drug-induced harm, whether from SSRIs, finasteride, or any other drug, you are all heroes to me. I've listened to a lot of your stories, and your courage and resilience is incredibly inspiring. I urge everyone who has experienced similar harm to speak out. Your story matters. If you're watching this and you haven't shared your story, please make a video like this or do an interview. I really believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant. Things will only change when people who have not been affected by these drugs understand the harm caused to many of us. Telling our stories openly and honestly is very powerful. Writing anonymously on Twitter or Reddit doesn't have the same impact. We have to make it real for people. They need to see that we are real people and we are living with this damage every day. I know how hard it can be. It's taken me months to make this video. But if I can do it, anyone can. You might think that it won't make any difference. Other people have already shared their stories, so it doesn't matter if you do it. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The more people who share their stories, the stronger our voice becomes. Everyone doing what they can adds up to something much greater than any of us could achieve on our own. Lots of small actions build momentum and combine into a tsunami that will demand attention. It's so easy to dismiss PSSD and PFS as extremely rare and write off the few people who have been brave and spoken out. We can change the world for the better if we all work together and do our part. We must keep pushing to raise awareness of the harms of these drugs. Imagine a world where no one else has to suffer like we have. A world where doctors understand PSSD and PFS, where patients are truly informed, where their symptoms are acknowledged and treated. That world is possible, but only if we make ourselves heard. Your story isn't just words. It's a tool for change. It's a weapon in the fight for justice. It's a wake-up call to the medical community. It's a light in the darkness. It's a beacon of hope for someone suffering in silence, thinking they're alone. It's a warning sign, protecting others from unknowingly stepping into the same trap we did. Every time we stay silent, the system that hurt us wins. Every time we speak up, we chip away at the wall of disbelief and ignorance. Don't let your suffering be in vain. Don't let others walk blindly into the darkness we've faced. We are the only ones who can drive this change. Not doctors, not researchers, not pharmaceutical companies. Us, the survivors. The ones who know the true extent of the damage that these drugs can cause. If we don't fight for change, who will? The time for silence is over. I hope you'll join me and share your story. Hi, my name's Andy. 13 years ago, a 4-month course of antidepressants changed my life forever. This is my story and a warning about the hidden dangers of SSRIs. When I was 23 years old, I was depressed after dropping out of college. My doctor prescribed me Citalopram, which I took for 4 months. I didn't notice any benefits, so I stopped taking it. When I stopped, I went into a horrible withdrawal and I became extremely ill. I experienced dozens of symptoms. Unfortunately, I never fully recovered after this, and even now, 13 years later, I still live with many of these debilitating symptoms. Some people call what I have PSSD, which stands for Post-SSRI Sexual Dysfunction. This name doesn't do it justice though. While I do experience sexual problems, I also have a lot of other symptoms that impact my life even more. Other people call it protracted withdrawal. I just call it SSRI damage. I'll start my story at the beginning. Before I took this drug, I was a completely healthy young man. I had been experiencing some anxiety around the projects I had to do for my college course. This led me to procrastinate on them and eventually drop out of the course. After this, I became quite depressed because I felt hopeless. I knew that if I couldn't overcome my anxiety, then I would never be able to move forward in my life. I went to my doctor, hoping that he would be able to refer me to a therapist. The doctor heavily persuaded me to take the antidepressant Citalopram. I was reluctant to take drugs for what I thought was a psychological problem. I asked him lots of questions. I remember he specifically told me not to read the side effect leaflet that comes with the drugs. He said I would only scare myself away from taking an effective treatment. Even if I had read the leaflet, it never would have warned me of what was to come. I trusted my doctor, and more importantly, I trusted medicine. I figured if all these smart people who publish in medical journals, write guidelines and work for the regulators are telling me that the best evidence says I should take this drug, then I should do it. I didn't want to be like Steve Jobs, thinking that I was smarter than medical science and refusing treatment. I never imagined in my worst nightmares that my life would be destroyed by a drug that a doctor could prescribe to me after a 10-minute conversation without any warning. Soon after I started the drug, I developed some side effects. I experienced nausea and dizziness, and I felt like my mind was racing at times. I also developed 3 or 4 mouth ulcers within the first few days of taking it. This was very unusual for me, as before this I would get roughly 1 mouth ulcer a year. I also had a very high sex drive for the first week on the drug. I told my doctor about these side effects and he completely dismissed them as unrelated to the drug. The side effects went away after a month or two, but I didn't notice any benefits. I was on 10 milligrams and my doctor told me to go up to 20 milligrams. After being on 20 milligrams for 2 days, I started getting impulsive suicidal thoughts. I'd never experienced anything like this before and it was terrifying. It was almost as if someone was implanting thoughts in my brain. It felt like they just came out of nowhere. I went back down to 10 milligrams and thankfully the intrusive thoughts went away. After being on the drug for 4 months, I decided to stop it. I didn't notice any benefits and I didn't want to be taking it long term for no reason. I spoke with my doctor and he told me that I could just quit cold turkey as I was on a low dose. I asked him about withdrawal symptoms. He said there wouldn't be any, but if I was worried, I could cut the pill in half for a week and then stop. At the time, this seemed to be a more sensible approach. I know now that this is a completely inadequate tapering process. Many people need to come off these drugs extremely slowly by tapering down over years in some cases. Almost immediately after I stopped, I knew something was very wrong. I started to experience a whole bunch of symptoms that I'd never had before in my life. Some of these symptoms gradually got better and eventually went away over time, but it took years. Others didn't fully recover and I still live with them to this day. One of the first things that I noticed was that my genitals went numb. I could still feel touch, but I had zero erogenous sensation in my penis. Masturbating felt like touching my finger. I felt absolutely no pleasure at all. My libido was also completely erased. Before taking this drug, I loved women. I put posters of half-naked women on my wall as a teenager. Now looking at a naked woman felt like looking at a tree or a rock. I felt no desire whatsoever. I also had anorgasmia, or if I was able to orgasm, they were severely muted and I barely felt any pleasure. I had very weak ejaculations where only a tiny drip of semen would come out. My erections were much weaker. I basically had complete sexual dysfunction as a 23-year-old man. It was as if my sexuality had been totally removed. I've noticed some improvements in this over time. My libido came back a little bit, but even now 13 years later I'm still far from normal. I also became incredibly socially withdrawn. I didn't want to be around other people, and when I was around them, my mind was blank. Before, when I was talking to people, my mind would be filled with jokes I could tell or stories I could share. Now it was just empty. It felt as if the connection to the social part of my brain was only making it through 10% of the time. I struggled to make eye contact with people, and I didn't smile or laugh nearly as often. It honestly felt like a part of my personality was deleted. Even 13 years later, I've only noticed a little improvement in this. It's completely destroyed my life. I feel like I'm constantly behind glass and I can never make a connection with another person. To give you an idea of how much this has affected me, I have not had any friends in the past 13 years. I've not had any relationships or sex either. I get good days and bad days, but even on my good days, I'm not anything like my old self. I lost a part of myself, and I doubt I'll ever get it back. If you were around me for a short period of time, you might not notice. You may think that I'm just a quiet person. Over the years, I've gotten slightly better at faking all the normal social behaviours that I used to do subconsciously. Several people who have been around me for longer periods of time have told me that I'm the quietest person that they have ever met. I think some of them think I have autism or social anxiety, but I don't have either of those. It's easier for me to let people believe this rather than try to explain what happened to me. Somehow that drug had a profound impact on my social abilities. It's devastating to live with a part of yourself missing and being cut off from everyone around you. I'm a little better around people I know well, but even with my own family, I can be very quiet and withdrawn at times. On bad days, I will just give them one-word answers and be incredibly robotic. It's horrible. I honestly wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. I've noticed that I tend to feel worse the longer I spend in social situations, especially if I'm in them for consecutive days in a row. It feels like a resource is being used up in my brain. The longer I spend around people, the worse my symptoms become. If I spend a few days on my own, then I tend to feel more social for a while when I start interacting with people again. I know how bizarre this sounds. I had never experienced anything like this before taking Citalopram, but I've been experiencing this consistently for the past 13 years. Some people who have PSSD describe feeling emotionally numb. I get this a little bit as well, but I think I have it less severe than other people. Sometimes I can't feel music as intensely as I used to and my emotions feel dulled. This comes and goes for me. For some reason my social ability was much more profoundly affected than my emotions. Another problem that I live with is brain fog and a lack of motivation, energy and drive. A lot of the time I feel pressure in my head. It feels like someone is gently squeezing on my temples. This started when I stopped the citalopram and I still get it to this day. I find it hard to focus and concentrate like I did before, and my memory is also worse. I will often need to read things several times, or I'll notice myself spacing off or losing my train of thought. Sometimes it's so bad, I need to lie down and try to wait for it to pass. I also don't have the energy or drive to do anything. Before taking this drug, I would get ideas popping into my head and I'd be motivated to do things. Now my mind is just blank all the time. I also have terrible insomnia. Sometimes I can't fall asleep for hours. Other times I fall asleep, but I wake up after a few hours and I'm unable to get back to sleep. Sometimes I do manage to get 8 hours of sleep, but when I wake up, I feel like I haven't slept. This causes me to have a lot of fatigue throughout the day. I never feel well rested, I'm exhausted all the time, and I don't have the energy to do much. I also have anger problems and a lack of patience. In the first year or two off the drug, I had a lot of anger. I remember shouting and screaming in my work at the time, which was completely out of character for me. Also, if something made me angry, I would get this strange tingling sensation in my brain. It would feel like I was constantly about to snap. I would stay in this angry, wound up state for a day or two after something triggered it, and any small inconvenience would make me incredibly frustrated. This got better over time, but even today I still have a lower tolerance for frustration than I had in the past. I need to manage it like a resource and take myself away from situations if I know they will cause me to become angry. I'd never had anger problems whatsoever before taking antidepressants. I also started to get mouth ulcers much more often again once I stopped the drug. In the past 13 years, I've had, on average, about 3 mouth ulcers every month. I get them on my lips, on my tongue, at the back of my throat, everywhere. I also got regular migraine headaches. I got about 1 a month for the first 5 years or so. Now, thankfully, I get them less often. I developed a lot of other physical symptoms as well. Many of them eventually resolved, although it took years. I remember that for the first year, I had zero appetite. I had to force myself to eat just because I knew it was time. I had digestion issues. Sometimes I'd be constipated, other times I'd have diarrhea, no matter what I ate. I had nausea and vomiting on occasion as well. I had frequent urination. Sometimes I had to pee 20 times a day. I even got tested for diabetes because it was so bad. I had body temperature issues. Sometimes I'd be burning up and have a mild fever. Other times I'd be shivering. I had depersonalization, where it feels like you're outside your own body looking in. I had anxiety, paranoia, and nightmares. My mood was also a lot more volatile. Sometimes I'd become really depressed and be crying, and then a few days later I would feel fine. Before taking citalopram, I didn't have any serious mental health problems. I had never experienced any of these things before in my life. I was only ever depressed because of my life circumstances. This was completely different. I also had frequent headaches, dizziness, and weird tingling sensations in my brain. I experienced so many symptoms that I'm sure there's some I've forgotten. It's hard to put this entire experience into words. It's been hell on earth. Obviously, when I started to experience all of this, I knew something was seriously wrong. I knew I was experiencing withdrawal from the drug. I tried to reinstate it on a few occasions to see if it would help, but it made me much worse. I started getting impulsive suicidal thoughts again. I knew it was too dangerous to keep taking it, so I had to quit and try to ride out the withdrawal. Looking back on it now, I know that when I stopped the citalopram, that was the moment that my life changed forever. Before that, I was a healthy 23-year-old man. Afterwards, I became a disabled person living with a chronic iatrogenic disease. At the time, I didn't know this though. I thought I was just experiencing withdrawal, and in a few months, it would pass and I would be back to normal. Slowly, the months turned into years and I began to realise that maybe I wasn't going to get better. The impact on my life from this has been catastrophic. Like I said, I've not had any friends in 13 years. I don't even want friends because I don't enjoy socialising anymore. I don't want to be around other people very often. I've not had any relationships or sex in the past 13 years either. Even ignoring the sexual dysfunction, sex is a social act. When you can't make a connection with another person, then you never even get to the point where sex is a possibility. I don't even care about sex. If I had to live with sexual dysfunction for the rest of my life, but I could make connections with other people again, think clearly, and be like my old self, I would take that deal in a heartbeat. It's impossible for me to function like a normal person. I don't have a full-time job and I still live with my parents. I'm very lucky that they have cared for me all this time. Honestly, I'm incredibly lucky to be alive. I've been suicidal on multiple occasions. I'm 37 years old now and it feels like my whole life was taken away from me. I know I will never get married or fall in love. I know I will never have children or a career. It's devastating. I feel like a part of my soul was stolen. I feel like a part of my personality was erased. I feel like half a person. It's like a part of me died back then and I'm the ghost of a person that used to be. I think about all the people I could have met and the experiences I could have had if only I hadn't taken that drug. It's the biggest mistake of my life. Not a day goes by that I don't regret taking it. I think sometimes when people hear the term post-SSRI sexual dysfunction, they think that is simply not being able to get an erection but everything else is normal. At least in my case, this is totally wrong. Sexual dysfunction is only one small part of this SSRI damage. It affects every single aspect of my life. What happened to me is the complete opposite of what should ever happen in medicine. My doctor took a healthy young man who had a temporary problem that probably would have resolved given time and gave him a drug that didn't benefit him at all and caused a permanent iatrogenic disease. Medicine is supposed to cure diseases, not cause them. I trusted my doctor to protect me from unnecessary risks and he betrayed that trust. If I had known there was any chance of getting lasting effects from that drug, I never would have taken it. A 10-minute doctor's appointment was all it took to destroy my life. I feel like I was poisoned. My doctor had good intentions. He believed that the drug would help me. Unfortunately, he was wrong and he exposed me to harm. I never went back and told my doctor everything that happened to me when I stopped the drug. I knew he wouldn't believe me because of how dismissive he was when I told him about side effects. I was terrified that he would prescribe me more drugs that would make things even worse. I also found thousands of people online who were experiencing similar problems after stopping SSRIs, and their doctors just dismissed them. They told them that withdrawal effects only last 2 weeks and that the drug is out of your system, so it can't possibly be causing any of these effects. I knew that doctors wouldn't believe me, and they couldn't help me. They blame everything on mental illness. You can't prove it was the drug, so it's impossible to change their minds. They will never believe a mentally ill patient over medical authorities who they trust. Lots of people can tolerate taking these drugs for years, which causes the people who are harmed to be disbelieved even more. I realised that this was a problem much bigger than just between me and my doctor. I did submit a report to the drug regulator in my country, but it didn't make any difference. I don't even know if anyone ever read it. The monitoring of harmful effects from prescription drugs is completely inadequate. I know what happened to me. I know that Citalopram changed my brain forever. There is no doubt in my mind. I'm more certain about that than almost anything. Whether it's epigenetic changes or something else is anyone's guess. I hope that scientists will choose to research the lasting effects of SSRIs. Things will only change when we have definitive proof of the damage caused by these drugs. There might be a lot more people affected than we realise. Many of them might believe their symptoms are caused by worsening mental health problems and not realise that the drugs might be to blame. Even now, I'm terrified that people watching this won't believe me. Many people who have been harmed by SSRIs aren't believed by doctors and sometimes even their own families. Since you look like a healthy person and you can't show anyone what has happened to you, it's easy for them to brush it off and blame everything on mental illness. It's incredibly traumatic to have something this profound happen to you and then for other people just to dismiss you as if you're crazy. Having a disease that completely destroys your life and not being able to prove it to other people is like something out of your worst nightmares. Despite the fear of not being believed, I feel that unless people like me share our stories, nothing will ever change. I never speak about what happened to me with other people. This is partly because of how withdrawn I am now, but it's also easier just to try to pretend to be normal. I think it would be hard to explain everything that I've experienced over the past 13 years within a few sentences and get people to really understand. But I feel like I have a responsibility to communicate the harm that has been done to me. That's why I've chosen to make this video. I don't want this to happen to any more people. I hope that my story can help to raise awareness of the harms of SSRIs. Before I finish, I would like to tell you about something very interesting that happened to me during the past 13 years. I'm actually able to completely reverse the genital numbness and partially reverse the other symptoms I experience as well. I can almost turn it on and off like a switch, and I think I'm one of the few people with PSSD who is able to do this. If you're watching this and you have PSSD, what I'm going to say almost certainly will not work for you. But I think it's a very unique and interesting experience that's worth sharing, and it does point towards the idea that PSSD may at least be partially reversible. After I'd been living with this SSRI damage for about 3 years, I noticed that I had started to get a strange response to vitamin D. When I took vitamin D, I'd get a bunch of symptoms. My bones would start aching, my kidneys would ache, I would get very thirsty, I would get itchy, I would get acid reflux, as well as nausea, vomiting and diarrhea. These symptoms were really quite severe at times, and they would go away if I avoided vitamin D. If I took vitamin D, they would come back again. The interesting thing about this is that whenever I had these symptoms, I also had a reversal of my sexual dysfunction. I have even experienced hypersexuality and a complete recovery of genital sensation, 100% back to normal. The only time when my sexual function approaches normal is when I have these effects from vitamin D. The rest of the time I'm at my baseline, which is that my genitals are significantly numbed and I have a low libido. Not only do my sexual symptoms improve, my social function also improves. I become more talkative, I smile more, I make eye contact more, my body language changes, I'm more confident. It feels like flickers of my old personality are coming back. It doesn't cure me. I still feel significantly more withdrawn than I used to be, but it's the only thing that has ever helped improve my social function. My brain fog also improves. I have improved energy levels and creativity. I feel stronger emotions. I feel more empathy towards others, and I get less anger. All the lasting symptoms I have from the SSRI improve together at the same time. When I first experienced this, I thought it was a miracle. I couldn't believe that after living with these symptoms for years, something had finally improved them. I believe that whatever vitamin D is doing in my system is directly acting on the underlying mechanism of the SSRI damage. It can't just be a coincidence that all of my symptoms improve at the same time. Unfortunately, this is not a cure for me. It doesn't allow me to live a normal life. Even though my symptoms improve, I still have them, they're just less intense. The harmful effects are also too severe to tolerate for extended periods of time. When my vitamin D level is higher, I also get significantly worse insomnia, and I become extremely tired. Sometimes I've only slept for 2 hours a night for a month straight. I start getting headaches all the time, I feel dreadful, and I can barely function. It's definitely not sustainable. It also doesn't feel like it's restoring me to normal. My mind starts to race a lot, and the hypersexuality that I get is definitely excessive. I think somehow the vitamin D is interacting with my brain, and the effects of this are partially compensating for the SSRI damage. I am able to keep my vitamin D level very low and maintain some mild benefits, without the harms becoming too intense. It's a very welcome relief. It takes the edge off of some of my worst symptoms. I honestly don't even know if I would still be alive if it wasn't for this mild relief that I get. Now obviously this response to vitamin D is abnormal. Initially I thought I was just vitamin D deficient, but after taking more and experiencing the harmful effects a lot more intensely, I realised that something was wrong. I even need to avoid the sun and use sunscreen, since even a small exposure will elevate my vitamin D and give me all of these symptoms. I don't know why I experienced this. There are a few different diseases that can cause bad reactions to vitamin D, some autoimmune conditions and things like that. It might have even been triggered by the adverse reaction I had from the SSRI in the first place, or it might just be a coincidence and I developed two separate health problems that are interacting with one another. I really don't know. I could tolerate vitamin D fine before ever taking the SSRI. I went to doctors for over 2.5 years and had a bunch of tests, but they couldn't figure it out. I eventually gave up trying to get it diagnosed. The vast majority of people with PSSD almost certainly don't have another condition that would make them hypersensitive to vitamin D like I am. This means that if they were to take vitamin D, they probably wouldn't notice any difference in their PSSD symptoms. Vitamin D affects the expression of hundreds of genes, so it's very difficult to know exactly why I get the improvements from it that I do. But something that I found interesting is that it increases the synthesis of serotonin and dopamine in the brain. I think a plausible hypothesis is that somehow the SSRI damaged these neurotransmitter systems, and my hypersensitivity to vitamin D is partially compensating for that damage. But this is just a blind guess, and I could be experiencing these effects for a totally different reason. We need scientists much more knowledgeable than me to study PSSD. If we could figure out why I'm experiencing these improvements from vitamin D, we might be able to figure out the underlying cause of PSSD. I wanted to share this experience because I think I'm one of the few people who can get significant improvements in my symptoms like this. It's possible that in the future there could be a cure for PSSD that would allow other people to do the same without all the harmful effects that I get. Finally, I would like to say, if you have PSSD, please don't be disheartened by hearing my story. I do believe that a lot of people eventually recover, but it can take years. Unfortunately, some people don't fully recover, and I'm one of them. But just because this happened to me doesn't mean it's going to happen to you. The only way to know is to be patient, give it time, and see if you improve. I would also like to say to all of the people who have shared their stories of drug-induced harm, whether from SSRIs, finasteride, or any other drug, you are all heroes to me. I've listened to a lot of your stories, and your courage and resilience is incredibly inspiring. I urge everyone who has experienced similar harm to speak out. Your story matters. If you're watching this and you haven't shared your story, please make a video like this or do an interview. I really believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant. Things will only change when people who have not been affected by these drugs understand the harm caused to many of us. Telling our stories openly and honestly is very powerful. Writing anonymously on Twitter or Reddit doesn't have the same impact. We have to make it real for people. They need to see that we are real people and we are living with this damage every day. I know how hard it can be. It's taken me months to make this video, but if I can do it, anyone can. You might think that it won't make any difference. Other people have already shared their stories, so it doesn't matter if you do it. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The more people who share their stories, the stronger our voice becomes. Everyone doing what they can adds up to something much greater than any of us could achieve on our own. Lots of small actions build momentum and combine into a tsunami that will demand attention. It's so easy to dismiss PSSD and PFS as extremely rare and write off the few people who have been brave and spoken out. We can change the world for the better if we all work together and do our part. We must keep pushing to raise awareness of the harms of these drugs. Imagine a world where no one else has to suffer like we have. A world where doctors understand PSSD and PFS, where patients are truly informed, where their symptoms are acknowledged and treated. That world is possible, but only if we make ourselves heard. Your story isn't just words, it's a tool for change. It's a weapon in the fight for justice. It's a wake-up call to the medical community. It's a light in the darkness. It's a beacon of hope for someone suffering in silence, thinking they're alone. It's a warning sign, protecting others from unknowingly stepping into the same trap we did. Every time we stay silent, the system that hurt us wins. Every time we speak up, we chip away at the wall of disbelief and ignorance. Don't let your suffering be in vain. Don't let others walk blindly into the darkness we've faced. We are the only ones who can drive this change. Not doctors, not researchers, not pharmaceutical companies. Us, the survivors. The ones who know the true extent of the damage that these drugs can cause. If we don't fight for change, who will? The time for silence is over. I hope you'll join me and share your story. Thanks for listening. Take care.